I don't know what they're smoking over there at Princeton. The focus on ridicule.
I'm white, and I've got everything I need. No one clutches their purses when they're in a room alone with me. And I can drive for any neighborhood I please at any hour, and the police don't do a thing. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got everything I need. I'm a guy getting paid more than a girl with a degree. And I can walk down the streets after dark, no one wants to rape me. And I can get a girl pregnant and just as easily flee. Just like my straight white male dad did to me. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. I've got a pile of broken mirrors and I'm walking under ladders and I'm spilling tons of salt, but to me that doesn't matter, cause my skin and my gender and my orientation are the best things to have if you live in this nation. I recommend it highly. I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. Shit's gonna work out for me, cause I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Intellectual Dollar Tree. We do the show live on Twitch every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Pacific. That's twitch.tv/Echoplex Media. So if you're listening to the podcast of this, go ahead and follow that Twitch channel. You'll be glad you did. Or maybe you won't. There's a lot of weird characters around here, but I love everybody here. It's a lot of fun. We've built a fun community here, and I'm glad people are showing up before the shows even start these days now. As you see, HK isn't here today. HK is on an adventure and will be back next week. He'll probably be glad that he missed this week. We're doing another Eric Weinstein fucking theory of everything video. Or in this case, for the people listening, we'll also call it a piece of audio. So I don't know, explaining physics and mathematics. I don't know anything about this channel. I just found it today when I was looking for Eric Weinstein, but they're going to have a discussion of physics theories of everything. Before we get started here, I will state the obvious. I'm not a theoretical physicist. I'm not a physicist of any kind. But lucky for me, there's only a couple real physicists on this panel anyway. The other two people, one is a venture capitalist and one is writes for Skeptic magazine. So, you know, we're an okay company here. So without any further ado, this is On the Quest for a Theory of Everything. And the channel name is Explaining Physics and Mathematics.
Philosophy has often been seen as a hunt for a theory of everything, a single grand narrative that explains it all. In recent
So here we go. Michael Shermer, not a theoretical physicist, not a physicist at all, journalist, sex assaulter. Sabina Hassenfelder, theoretical physicist. I believe Brian Greene is also a theoretical physicist. Eric Weinstein, venture capitalist. And the host, I believe, is an astronomer, just so we're kind of clear as to who's who and what's what here.
In times, science has had its own supporters for a theory of everything. Yet, no theory of everything in philosophy or science is forthcoming. And is it even possible? It would have to, after all, include itself. Can we conceive of a universe that also includes its causes and its laws? Can a universe have no before or after, no outside? And isn't a theory of everything itself bounded by its particular culture, its language, and its mode of thinking? So, should we abandon the dream of a theory of everything, simply see it as an illusion born of a hubris? Is the mistake not with the idea of a full explanation, but with the idea of everything, or as the Greeks would have said, the one? Or is it just possible that, as Stephen Hawking once believed, a theory of everything is just around the corner. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Professor Catherine Haymans. I am the astronomer.
Got any more than
Scotland,
pixels?
and it is my great pleasure tonight to host The End of Everything. And we will be answering the question, should we abandon the dream of the theory of everything? I have four amazing speakers with me this evening. We have Eric Weinstein. He is an American podcast host. He is the managing director of Teal Capital, one of the founding members of the intellectual dark web, and a doctor of mathematical physics. His geometric unity theory of everything has been both praised and criticized by the academic community.
That's a bit of a mischaracterization of how the academic community responded to his theory of everything. I think he said
The focus on ridicule.
about the academic community's response to his theory of everything.
Sabine Hossenfelder is a theoretical physicist at Frankfurt Institute of Advanced Studies. She specializes in quantum gravity. She's also a best-selling author, and look out for her new book this summer, Existential Physics, a scientist...
We're rooting for her, by the way, just so everybody knows. This is who we're rooting for on this.
To life's biggest questions. Sabine also has a very popular YouTube channel. Check it out, Science Without the Gobbledygook. We have Brian Greene, a professor of mathematics and physics at the University of Columbia. He is both famous for his groundbreaking discoveries in string theory and his best-selling books, the most recent of which is entitled Until the End of Time.
Oh, this might get spicy. Eric hates string theory.
Mind, Matter, and Our Search for Meaning in an Evolving Universe. And
That's
finally,
in a nice
last
place.
but by no means least, Michael Shermer, science writer, historian, founder of the Skeptic Society, and editor-in-chief of its magazine, Skeptic. He is also a best-selling author. His recent book, Giving the Devil His Due, explores the concepts of free speech and, interestingly, ideas of controversial intellectuals. I wonder if we will be controversial enough for you this evening.
No. When he says controversial intellectuals, he means Stefan Molyneux. Let's be clear, lady. Catherine's doing her best, though. She's doing her best. She's got two scientists, and I would suggest on this matter, two charlatans.
Michael. I am going to invite all of my speakers to answer the question for me. The question is it possible to find a theory of everything? They have 2 minutes each, and we're going to start off with Brian Greene. Brian, is it possible to find a theory of everything?
Well, I should say at the outset that I am not a fan of the phrase theory of everything, because the number of issues that it raises, some of which you summarized in your opening remarks quite well, are enormous. And it also, from a sociological standpoint, makes an odd statement within the community. If you say that you're working on the theory of everything and someone's not working on it or something like it, then what are they working on?
Oh, I like him already.
It's not a good phrasing to use, even though it is quite commonplace. Instead, I think a better phrasing is the search for ever deeper principles that unify our understanding of the world. And by that, I simply mean you could explain the world by simply giving a list of all of the physical facts about the world. It would be a very unwieldy explanation of the world. It wouldn't give you much insight at all. So that's why that's typically not the approach we take. Instead, we try to find patterns in the world, encapsulate those patterns in physical law, and then be able to describe a wealth of phenomenon from a few principles. And the smaller the number of principles and the greater the range of phenomena we can describe, the better and more potent we consider our explanations. And historically, that's exactly what has happened, even if that wasn't initially the motivation, right? I mean, Isaac Newton showed that physics here on Earth and physics up there in the sky are all governed by the same basic law of gravity. And then you've got Maxwell and others in the 1800s showing that electricity and magnetism, Faraday, come together into a unified theory of electricity and magnetism. They're deeply related patterns that put things together. Einstein comes along and shows us that space and time that we thought were distinct, they're actually unified in the special theory of relativity. And then he puts gravity into that mix with the general theory of relativity. And you fast forward into the 60s and 70s, and scientists, Abdus Salam and Glasgow and Weinberg, put together one of the nuclear forces, the weak nuclear force, with electricity and magnetism, unifying them into one theoretical structure called the electroweak theory. And so this pattern of unification, smaller number of principles, greater explanatory reach, has been what we've seen played out. The big question is, will this continue? Right? I mean, in America, when you invest in some kind of fund, they always say, past results are not indicative of future success. The same may be true here, right? But certainly, we're going to have to put gravity and quantum mechanics together. That next stage of unity, I think, is pretty uncontroversial that it needs to happen. Whether we have it now or not is debatable and worth discussing. But whether this then categorizes or should be described as a theory of everything, no, it's not a theory of everything. It would be a theory of the fundamental ingredients, the fundamental laws that describe them. It's a much less ambitious approach to understanding the world.
Sabina, is it possible to find a theory of everything?
Well, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I think it's not something I'm going to see in my lifetime. Though I should put ahead that, like Brian, I'm not a fan of the phrase theory of everything because it raises a lot of thorny issues and people tend to misunderstand it. Physicists who work in the foundations of physics mean something very specific by a theory of everything, which is a unified description of all the fundamental forces of nature that we currently know of, which besides gravity are the three forces in the Standard Model. And so we have those four forces. They kind of sit a little bit awkward next to each other. And one of the big thorny questions is why is gravity not a quantum force? And that discrepancy has to be resolved somehow. So the quantization of gravity is part of this theory of everything, but also physicists would like all these forces to come out of one simple prescription. Now, the question whether such a theory would actually explain everything, I think no one really knows. It's generally assumed that if we had succeeded in unifying those forces, that would also explain some of the puzzles that we have. Like, for example, what is dark matter? What is dark energy? It would resolve singularities. It would explain what happens inside of black holes. Whether such a theory actually would do this, we don't know. And I'm very skeptical that any of the current approaches to such a theory of everything will actually work. The reason is quite simply that none of those theories ever address what in my mind is the biggest problem. That's the measurement problem in quantum mechanics. So none of those theories would actually explain what a detector is. And I would say, well, if you have a theory of everything that doesn't tell me what a detector is, that's a poor theory of everything, because a detector is clearly something. Now, when it comes to those more philosophical questions, like can a theory actually explain itself, I think I'm not the right person to ask.
So I like how she front loaded it with the two people who are working in the field. And now we're going to hear from the two people who are not doing any meaningful work in the field.
Well, we will come on to that, Sabina. Thank you very much. Eric, please do unmute yourself and tell us, is it possible to find a theory of everything?
Since I've addressed this elsewhere, let me just say yes, so that we can have more time for the debate. And that's, of course, up to the caveats about not being able to compute everything from it. So thanks very much.
Holy shit, I can't believe he just fucking didn't take the whole 2 minutes. I'm stunned. I thought he was going to tell you why his theory is a theory of everything.
Thank you, Eric. And finally, Michael Shermer, is it possible to find a theory of everything?
Well, I'll take Eric's 1.5 minutes left. I think so. In the physical sciences, from a history of science perspective, it seems that's the direction that physicists are moving, given Brian's caveats. From there, probably not, because so much of the biological and social sciences deal with emergent properties that are not predictable and cannot be derived out of sort of reductionistic, more fundamental principles. So say, take Darwin's theory of evolution, which is the closest we have in the biological sciences to a theory of everything. But even there's so many wrinkles on it. And applying it to, say, Darwinian medicine or evolutionary psychology, it's still much of human behavior is quite unpredictable because it's emergent from other phenomenon that are not directly derived from these more fundamental principles. And if you move to the social sciences and you say, well, where can we, how do we explain unemployment? So the economist studies unemployment. Where is unemployment in any kind of physics or biological theories? It's not. Or the study of human conflict or violence or.
Okay, Shermer's like off the playing field somewhere. I'm aware that when we say a theory of everything, we mean a physics theory of everything. We don't mean it's going to explain like, why did I oversleep today?
Deaths of despair, opioid crisis, you name it. All of these things have to be studied as emergent properties of their own. There's not going to be any theory of everything because in most cases, you're lucky if you can reduce it to half a dozen variables controlling for all these others. And even there, prediction is extremely difficult. So that said, I think there is an appeal to it because it feels like you're moving into almost a theological realm of, we'll know the mind of God, and when Stephen Hawking wrote that, of course, theologians went crazy like, the great Stephen Hawking supports us. So I have a whole book on this subject called The Borderlands of Science, in which I talk about theories of everything, including a fellow. So these people send me these theories pretty much every month. I get them. I have filed cabinets.
Tell us what you think of Eric's. Oh, that's right. He's your pal in the culture war. You're not going to say shit about Eric's theory of everything.
Of theories of everything. These are not the kind of stuff that Eric and Brian and Sabina are working on. This guy writes, by the way, he has the URL www.theoryofeverything.com.
But Brian and Sabina just said that her name is Sabine, not Sabina. They just said they don't really like the concept of a theory of everything. So they're not working on it. These people they're doing like the hard work in the sciences. To some extent, I think they're both science communicators too, but they're not doing the same thing that Eric thinks he's doing.
Sorry, it's been taken. And so I always write these people back and say, well, why don't you try talking to a physicist about this? And like this guy then responded, I sent it to many scientists, but nobody interested so far. And many of them said, boy, don't be stupid. Nobody.
Is that Eric's letter to you? Did Eric write that to you?
Theory of everything, it's too crazy. It's impossible. It would be like knowing the mind of God. If you're not interested, please don't write me anymore. Spare me your critical view. So
it's cancel culture. Don't cancel culture me.
So I have hundreds of these kinds of things. There's an appeal to it. Like if I can get this, then I'm going to be the next Einstein or Feynman or Newton or whatever. And so it most likely, of course, none of these are true. But I think beyond the physical sciences, it's probably a fruitless endeavor.
Thank you very much, Michael. So you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we have a kind of a range of opinions there on what a theory of everything is, whether it's possible, whether it's not. And our first theme for our debate this evening is, would a theory of everything answer all our fundamental questions about the universe, including the existence of the theory itself? And we're going to start.
Well, that's a dumb question.
To answer this question.
Well, again, I've already given my misgivings about thinking in terms of a theory of everything at all, so I won't retread that particular answer. But I think Michael's comment is a fertile place to begin an answer to that question, because in many ways, I agree with what Michael just mentioned. There are all sorts of phenomena that happen at a variety of scales in the world. Right, we physicists, or at least we particle physicists, tend to focus upon the electrons, the quarks, the fundamental constituents, and the fundamental laws that govern their behaviors. But when you have a lot of particles come together into a macroscopic system, there are behaviors that emerge in that system that would be very hard to explain at the level of the fundamental particles. I mean, even a simple thing as a baseball flying in a baseball game, if you were to describe it in terms of the motion of the individual constituents, it'd be this mountain of data describing each and every particle, and it would give no insight. Much more useful is to describe it as a baseball flying through the air in the way that
I like this guy.
Newton would have described that.
Don't look him up. I bet he's got some problematic shit about cancel culture or some shit on his Twitter, right?
The world is striated into a variety of scales. There's phenomena that happens at different scales. And what we found is it's best to use the variables and the ideas that are most relevant to the scale of the question being asked. Baseball or human beings, you don't want to answer in terms of particles, but you talk about the spectrum of hydrogen. When it's excited, then yeah, you do want to be right down there at the quantum mechanical level and describe in terms of particles. Now, the one thing I would add to that, though, and I don't know if this is controversial or if Michael or others would find this controversial, I would take exception to one thing that Michael said. I would say that emergent phenomena, in principle, are determined by the fundamental laws that govern the basic ingredients. I don't think there's anything else beyond the fundamental ingredients and the fundamental laws. It's extraordinarily difficult and largely a fool's errand to try to describe unemployment using the standard model of particle physics, of course. But is there something else beyond the particles and the laws? No. So in principle, if you follow the particles and you follow the laws, and you could do an unimaginable calculation that we can't possibly do, but in principle, would you know that a certain collection of particles at some particular point in time exhibited behavior that we would call being unemployed? Yeah. In principle, yes. In principle needs to be underscored for a variety of different reasons.
I think this guy might be stoned too, and I think that might be why I like him.
But I don't think there's anything else that intervenes beyond the ingredients and the laws.
Okay, so you just need to define those ingredients and then everything else follows.
In principle, yes. What else would there be?
I don't know. What else would there be? Not any ghost of the machine, no external extra sensory or supernatural powers intervening. No. But if the universe is not predetermined, we live in a determined universe with cause and effect, but not predetermined, then the outcome is not predictable, not even in principle. Not even Laplace's demon that knows every particle and every motion and so forth can predict.
Well, what does that mean? Can you just clarify what you mean? Again, in principle, there's a quantum mechanical.
Oh, dude, yeah, Michael Shermer is gonna get fucking dragged in this conversation because he doesn't know what he's talking about. Eric might too, but Eric might fucking say very little because he's there with two people who are real subject matter experts.
That won't predict what will happen, but will predict the probability of what will happen. And then, as Sabina mentioned, there is this issue of the quantum measurement problem that is unresolved. I agree with what Sabina said completely. That's the missing piece. But if we put that to the side just for having this conversation, I would say that the probabilities are in principle determined by the collection of particles that are engaged in whatever macroscopic system you're talking about.
Interesting. Yeah. So this kind of touches on almost the free will determinism problem.
Oh,
see here again,
a big impact from free will.
Yeah,
it doesn't exist.
So if you just
yikes, dude, I don't know about that.
You could drill down to the
wait a minute. This free will stuff. I don't talk about this stuff a lot, but I don't know if free will as like some sort of a force that acts within us exists. But we have to walk around this world and judge other people's behavior as if free will does exist. Or nobody's an asshole. It's just the fault of the fucking atoms they're made up of. And the atoms were just going to do that anyway.
Level of synaptic transmissions of neurochemical transmitter substances and how they're affected by cocaine or whatever. And then from there scale up. But at some point, it seems to me the system is so complex and the person himself or herself is an active agent within the causal net of the universe. And at some point just decides I'm going to go left instead of right. I'm going to control my addiction or I'm not. And we know some people can do this and some can't. So it's not that it's determined in the future that we already know exactly if we knew every particle, which every person that would be an addict and which are not, that in fact there's an element of volition in there of knowing what the causal vectors are and what you can do to control the forthcoming, your future self and kind of predetermining your own future self by taking some control over those variables. Here, it's a kind of a semantic game, maybe, but that's what you mean by volition.
I don't think it's semantic, but I just wouldn't confuse predictability in the sense of being able to do the calculation with some kind of volition, which to me is a ghost in the machine. If it's not the particles and the laws of physics, if you're saying there's something else, you got to tell me what that something else is. And I know you.
I really like this
that
Brian
you don't
Green
think
guy
there's
so
anything
far.
else.
Don't look him up on
No,
Twitter, at
of
least
course
until the post game, please.
Awareness of the
Eric,
factors. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to bring in Eric here. So Eric, Lee Smolin, he's described where we're at in physics at the moment with the principles that Brian's talking about here that infers everything. He's described physicists as like biologists before Darwin. That we're missing a really big picture. So what's your thoughts on this? You know,
We're in danger of spending the hour on the issue of computability and effective theories. And I think
Wait, what the fuck? Where did he just fucking come on? Watch what he says here. This is wild.
what's your thoughts on this? You know,
we're in danger of spending the hour on the issue of computability and effective theories. And
That's not a danger. I thought that's what you were there to talk about, or like some version of it. Computability means like the ability, I don't know, the ability to make sense of what is being said or what's being presented to you. And then realistic theories, I don't remember the word he used, like, but yeah, we're at risk of that. I thought wouldn't that be the point of such a discussion, Eric?
And I think everybody's probably agreed there is no way, in theory, even Brian will not say that the computation is possible. You can show that the system can't compute itself. So let's agree that the first issue is that we have to understand that the theory of everything, if it is to be given meaning and to evade Brian's criticism, has to be narrowed. It's not the colloquial sense. It has to do with finding the rules of chess if the universe was chess by observing chess games. It doesn't tell you how to play chess, and it doesn't necessarily tell you who created chess, right? So what I've tried to say concretely is that I believe that our particular universe, and just to give you grist for actual debate where we will disagree, I am betting that the universe is determined by a four-dimensional orientable manifold with a unique spin structure, that would be sufficient to generate three families of fermions with the observed quantum numbers, as well as geometric laws for the metric. And
is I hope one of the real scientists that's on, or one of the real physicists that's on this panel, just ask him to explain what the fuck he's talking about.
And also just to possibly give some region for debate. I would also say that quantum gravity is not the only way of harmonizing the standard model with Einstein's theory of general relativity necessarily, and that there was a little bit of a three-card Monte played in the late 70s, early 80s, where we went from unified field theory towards quantum gravity, which very much favored quantum field theorists and what used to be high energy physics, which has now become no energy physics, because most of it isn't really about physics at all. I mean, were we to read through the archive today, none of us could contain our sense of embarrassment of doing this in front of 1,000 people. So I think that that's our paper repository. I think that the important thing to say is that a theory of everything as a physical theory is one which demotivates physicists to keep working on the problem of the rules of chess if the universe was chess, and hands it over to philosophers. We don't know where the number 7 comes from, but I know very few mathematicians who spend their time worrying about the origin of that numeral. So I think that it's very important to actually understand that the most audacious thing that we can say is that we are extremely close in some of our estimations to a theory of everything properly scoped so as not to include the issue of effective theories, computation, or the origins of an initial set. I don't think that
okay, so two of those things at the end are not like the other. The computational or whatever, he's basically saying the ability to figure it out. And like whether or not the theory is usable or good. Well, the second one is super important, and I think the first one's somewhat important too. But then the second one is like, who put the theory there? It's like, shut up.
You actually entered the debate when you said that in your initial statement. So I think you're now a participant. And I heartily disagree with your opening statement that it should contain itself. In fact, it should go over to the philosophers and theologians to ask what the initial conditions are all about. And by the way, by initial, I don't mean in time, because time itself is part of the story. I think what I'm really trying to say is you have to postulate that there is something rather than nothing, And then the idea is that no physicist should be motivated to continue that search.
Sabina, I'm going to bring you in here because you've been uncharacteristically quiet until this point. So I think you'll agree with some of the things that Eric just said, but
Probably not.
Yeah, but I think I'm going to do the boring thing and will try to actually answer the question which you ask whether theory can explain itself. My answer would be not within the confines of science to begin with, because the purpose of science is to explain observations. The purpose of science is not to explain the theories that are supposed to explain the observations, unless, I mean, you mean this in the colloquial sense, like that I'm trying to explain to you how quantum mechanics works, that kind of thing. But there's also another way to see what the problem is. One of the requirements we have of a theory of everything, a fundamental theory of nature, is that it's internally consistent, which is exactly what we currently don't have. Like if we just take all those four interactions, standard model and gravity, and we throw them together, that's not internally consistent, which is why we think there has to be a theory of quantum gravity. But if you only have this requirement of consistency, there are lots of theories out there. There are lots of sets of axioms that are axiomatically consistent, and their only shortcoming is that they don't describe what we see. You can make up a theory about an empty universe that doesn't contain any matter, and there wouldn't be anything wrong with it other than that it's not the universe we inhabit. Which means that whatever this theory is, this theory of everything, some of the answers it will give is just, it's because that's what we observe. Because we need this to pick one specific theory. The universe is one way and not another, basically. So this is why I think a theory that describes everything we observe would still have some unanswered questions, just because it will have certain ingredients that we had to pick to describe what we observe.
One of the things that I think might be interesting for Sabina and I to chew over is I actually think that it's not just to explain experiment. A really good theory should actually challenge things that we think we know to be true that turn out are not true.
No! Oh my God. This all kind of stems from, there's this myth that we have about like inventors and scientists. I don't know if it exists outside of the USA, but I feel like it has to. When you watch like a show, like any kind of show, or maybe a cartoon's probably even a better example, right? If somebody's an inventor, they're like toiling away by themselves in their fucking basement inventing a thing. And Eric lives in that world in his head. He has to, because he believes he's that inventor. And so that colors everything he says here. And so if he's going to go outside of the realm of a theory explaining the results of subsequent experimentation, then he's not describing a scientific theory anymore. He's describing a myth about somebody like fucking conjuring from the universe's intelligence a sort of knowledge that we can't or don't need to test. And that's the opposite of science.
And one of the things that I find very interesting is the number of theories that are as timid as possible, like a sterile neutrino theory, which attempts to say as little beyond the standard model in gravity as we can. So I think that a really good theory should actually point and say, how sure are you about all these things you think you've observed? Furthermore,
but we already have that.
I think that it's also,
we already know that. We already know that like an eyewitness is like a thing you think you observed. That's why you do experimentation after you think you observed something. I opened this with, I am not a scientist, but I have like a basic understanding of what it's for. This guy thinks it's to fucking to make sure everybody knows he's a genius. That's what he thinks science is for.
Also possible, I heard Sabina say quantum gravity. If you think about going in the opposite direction, Einstein's theory was initially geometric, whereas the quantum depended on calculus and linear algebra. And what really happened is we went in exactly the opposite direction. We didn't quantize gravity. We geometrized the quantum from the period of the early to mid 70s through this explosion, largely due to the string theorists not doing string theory, but instead geometrizing quantum field theory in the 80s and 90s. And so really, things have been going in the other direction, where the children of Einstein have been more effective at transforming the thinking process of the children of Bohr. And so I think instead of thinking about quantum gravity, we should pull back and say we need to harmonize the two theories rather than force gravity to submit to the quantum.
But that's not what any of these people. She says that she's Sabina. Maybe I was wrong earlier when I said that it's a Sabine. It looks like it's Sabine, but everybody's calling her Sabina, so I don't want to rock the boat here. But she didn't say that it has to be like that. She said she thinks that's what's coming, or that's what we're working on. She didn't say it just has to be this fucking thing. He's going to like mischaracterize the two people who are doing work in the field of science on this stream constantly if they let him keep talking.
Thank you, Eric.
Well, if I can briefly respond to this, I actually agree. I think this is an issue of terminology. So when I say quantum gravity, I don't necessarily mean you have to quantize gravity, but as any kind of theory that resolves the inconsistency between the quantized quantum field theories and gravity.
Thanks, Sabina. So we have the highlight talk after our debate this evening by Michio Kaku, and he's very
God.
On the
Michio Kaku's going to talk about a theory of everything on this channel. Well, that's what we're watching during the post game. I'm sorry, everybody. It's Theory of Everybody Wednesday this week. Theory of Everybody, Theory of Everything. Well, maybe we should come up with a theory of everybody. Everybody can go fuck themselves. That's my theory of everybody.
Of physics, the fact that it can be characterized by unification. So, of course, we have Newton with the theory of the heavens, fantastic Maxwell, unifying electromagnetism. And Brian, I know you've spent your life working on string theory, which is looking at unifying electromagnetism, the strong and the weak theory. Why do you think historically we have been so fixated on trying to get this theory of everything? You've been working on this for 30 years.
I have the answer. A bunch of quacks run around trying to talk about the theory of everything because it makes for good, bad science communication. This Brian person already explained to you why he doesn't believe this theory of everything as it's presented. He says, as you understand things better, you're able to explain more by saying less to people who understand what you're talking about. That's what he says. You just keep taking these, you have two ideas and you're able to, with new information, merge them together so that one idea explains the previous two ideas. You didn't get rid of the two ideas before. It's just you have one foundational concept or whatever that explains those two ideas. So my answer to this is that that fucking charlatans love the theory of everything. That's the answer, I think.
Brian, so you must be slightly fixated on it.
Well, first off, I wouldn't say that the goal of string theory is to unify all the forces of nature. I would say that's an interesting byproduct of the theory. The real motivation for string theory is what we just heard from Eric and Sabina. It's a particular approach to trying to resolve this incompatibility between the traditional formulation of quantum mechanics and the traditional formulation of the general theory of relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity. And string theory is simply one approach which, at least on paper, shows great promise to blend these two theories into a mathematically consistent framework. Now, when you study that theory in detail, you can extract a very satisfying unification that does continue the work of Newton and the work of Faraday and Maxwell and the work of Salam and Weinberg and Glashow, because it does naturally put together the fundamental forces, gravity, electromagnetism, the weak and strong nuclear forces, and gravity. They're all put together into one unified rubric. They're all the result of certain kinds of vibrations of this hypothetical ingredient called a string. So it's not the motivation, it's really the outcome. But I will say that I certainly agree with you that historically, even beyond physics, we do see a kind of human drive toward unity, and maybe Michael can give us the philosophical or evolutionary psychological reason for that. I mean, you can see that in the world.
Michael Shermer, an evolutionary psychologist.
When many of the world's religions had many different deities, and then at some point, some religions tend to consolidate and come to a monotheistic, a unification, if you will, of those kinds of forces. And you know, I even I did a program just the other day on something non-physics at all. It's about psychedelics, okay? And
that's why I like this guy. He's done a bunch of acid.
Involved in psychedelics. They see psychedelics as a unified theory of everything, of human consciousness. It's as if, you know, any area that you're within, you talk to a priest, religion's a unified theory of everything. So I think there's a human tendency for a desire for our ideas of the moment to have incredibly large explanatory reach. So maybe that's...
he's explaining Eric Weinstein perfectly. Like, he's absolutely explaining Eric Weinstein right now. I don't know if he's doing it on purpose or not, but it sounds to me like he's describing Eric Weinstein.
Part of the drive, but for string theory and for physics more generally, it's more what Sabina was saying. We have certain data about the world. We're trying to explain that data in the most straightforward and predictive means possible. We come up with certain mathematical theories, quantum mechanics and general relativity, the standard model being among those, and we want those theories to talk to each other in a mathematically consistent way, and at the moment they don't. Now, the world's a consistent place, so our description needs to be consistent, and that is really what motivates us to try to go the next step. And again, string theory is just one possible way that may or may not be the way to do that.
Thanks, Brian. Eric, do you feel fixated in the search for the theory of everything? You know, you said quite confidently at the start that you believed that it was possible to find one, and you have your own theory.
Look, the answer to this question changed in 1952.
He's given this fucking little mini lecture. He's going to say that the sciences became captured. I don't know. It's going to be some version of like cultural Marxism or some shit happening in the sciences. He's going to say the best people aren't doing the sciences anymore. We let the women folk in, or whatever the fuck he's going to say here. I've heard him give this fucking exact miniature speech a dozen times already.
6 months between 1952 and 1953, we successfully fused nuclei and caused an island in the Pacific to disappear, as well as we entered the cell and found the three-dimensional structure of DNA and the genetic code 10 years after. We're going to die here very soon. And by soon, I mean a few hundred years at most, almost certainly. We're having a cigar party and a fireworks display while perched on a propane tank. You can see from, for example, the fact that we're all wearing these masks. People haven't even figured out that they're going to have to buy hazmat suits if we start having thermonuclear exchanges.
What the fuck is he talking about now? Whoa, dude. I mean, he may be right that human beings, if we don't fucking change course, are a couple hundred years before, maybe not that we're gone, but that it becomes so unlivable on so much of the planet that our population would reduce greatly. And those who make it, even though they were privileged previously, would be struggling greatly. But his way of, he just can't fucking, I don't know, he can't just say something in a straightforward way. It's so weird watching this guy pretend to be a genius. It's just so weird.
I'm not kidding at all about this. So the new reason to do this isn't the beauty of gazing into the night sky or man's quest to know his place in the universe. If we don't...
Eric needs to save the world, everybody.
Figure out how to spread out. We are running one single experiment with godlike powers and the wisdom of morons based on our current political leadership. There is no way that this terminates well. Furthermore, there is no faster than light travel inside of general relativity. So you can look up at the night sky and you can know more or less that unless you're betting on time dilation and other exotic effects and wormholes, we aren't going anyplace. There are only 3 habitable spheres. Now, The world's richest people, two of them, Bezos and Musk, are focused on rockets to get us into space. One of us thinks that we can diversify with 3 spheres. The other seems to think that Gerald K. O'Neill's circular space stations with artificial gravity are the way to go. Bezos actually makes more sense. Neither of these make much sense at all.
But okay, so like listen, this is like a leftist channel and a clearly leftist podcast, right? But I don't think that either of these people thinks that they're going to use a rocket to get us to the fucking, even like to the outer planets in our own solar system. I mean, this is obvious to anyone.
The odd thing to say, and again, I don't want to go too much into social commentary, is that if we could only get physics to be vaguely phallic in shape, load it with high explosives and oxidizers, we could get fully funded, and I think we'd probably have a theory within 20 years. At the moment, nobody seems to be motivated on the idea that you break it, you bought it. Physics has a ton of social responsibility. We unleashed this power. I encourage everyone to read Edward Teller's letter to Leo Szilard at the end of the Manhattan Project and to reevaluate their theories of Edward Teller. His idea was that war had to become so unthinkable that we could never have another. And 75 years of this peace have dulled.
No, the most profound thing said after the the Manhattan Project was like a very short statement, and I believe it was Oppenheimer. He is like, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds," and that's some book cannot encapsulate the discovery or the invention of the nuclear weapon any better than that.
Sensibilities, forgetting that nuclear weapons have not gone away, and we've added biologicals. If we're not very careful, we are going to have to go farther through the valley of death that physics has led us into if we are ever to escape, diversify, and have some hope that some of us at least will make it in the long term.
Oh, Eric, that went off on a tangent from the theory of everything. But
yeah, because he doesn't know anything about the fucking subject matter. He has a degree in physics, but he's been doing venture capital for such a long time. Like things that you study are like, it's like fucking riding a bike. You're not going to fall off it when you get on it again after 10 or 15 years. You're going to be a little wobbly though. And maybe it's not time to go ride a fucking cycling race,
You have a chance to survive, Catherine. You have an opportunity because you know Hamiltonian dynamics and Lagrangians and all that to work on an escape plan. In fact, I would say we have an obligation I think Teller's comment was to tie the toe of the genie from the bottle we helped it to escape.
But wait a minute, you could say this about any invention. It doesn't have to be the nuclear weapon. We could just say this about the firearm. We could say this about a tank. We could say this about aircraft, because aircraft are used to drop nuclear weapons. No, what he's saying makes no sense. Technology, be it, we learned to make a fire, and then somebody decided they were going to use that technology to burn down a village. Well, whoever invented the fire doesn't owe anything to anybody. They didn't burn down the village.
Theory of everything exists. It renders Einstein and the Standard Model as effective theories to be deduced from the underlying theory. We don't know whether an analog of the prohibition on faster than light travel persists into a lower layer until we have such a theory. So it could be that if you had the theory of everything, you could prove that you will never meaningfully escape the solar system.
Eric is saying,
but wait a minute, but he just a little while ago said that we're not going to be worried about effective theories. But if you were going to fucking figure out if you could travel faster than light, I feel like you'd need an effective theory. One that you could do calculations on. What the fuck? I know everybody on this panel is like super polite and shit, but I just would love to just be able to grab the inner monologue of the two people in the fucking middle on the top,
saying we must pursue this theory of everything because fundamentally humanity needs to escape and go somewhere else.
Diversify.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm doing something very shocking now. I'll actually agree with Eric, which is that I think physicists totally underestimate their responsibility. And I think the relevance of the foundations of physics at this point in the history of time is totally underestimated. We need some new technologies. We're kind of running out of ideas here. And I think they have to come from the foundations of physics. Now, where we start to disagree is exactly where those new ideas should be coming from. And I don't really.
She just went after him. Like, this is so funny listening to this because this lady's super nice and I like her channel. She's also funny. She makes a little fun of Eric on her channel. But she just said we fundamentally disagree on where this stuff should come from. And she's going to basically say, here, I'm imagining, and I don't want to put words in her mouth. But after I'm done running my mouth, we're going to let her talk. She's going to say that it's going to come from inside the physics community, people that are working together, people that are testing each other's ideas, people that are reviewing each other's papers and replicating each other's experiments. And then it's not just going to come from just some random fucking place.
That quantum gravity is the right direction to look. I've worked for a long time on quantum gravity. I don't think that looking for mathematical consistency is the right thing to do, but we should be looking for experimental evidence. And I can talk about this for some time. But the point is that all those effects of quantum gravity, they're like really, really small. And even though I think they're super important to understand the universe, I can't really see that they're going to be technologically relevant in the near future, which is why as of recently I'm more working in the direction of the foundations of quantum mechanics, where we're talking about the measurement problem, because quantum mechanics is the theoretical framework that underlies all our current technology. And if we understand this better, if we figure out that this is not fundamentally the right thing to do, that's going to impact all our technologies and is almost certainly going to lead to applications.
Thanks, Savina. Now, Michael, Eric's just upped the ante here, saying we need a theory of everything to diversify and save humanity. So where is that? If we really need to pursue that, where is that theory of everything going to come from? And you've wrote a really interesting review of Margaret Wertheim's book recently, where you were saying that you were becoming less dismissive of these theories of everything that you were being sent, that maybe mainstream academic physics is not the place to look at these things. I wonder if you want to expand on that thought.
Right. Yeah, well, first, thanks for the
Okay, so this could go fucking full on culture war shit where he's just going to be like, well, the fucking universities are too woke now to think about anything important. But I don't think he's going to do that here. But he and Eric have both said some version of that in the past.
The cheery Monday morning, Eric. We're all doomed. We only have a couple centuries to go. We got to go to Mars and start a new human colony. I do support that idea, just in case, but not just in case we cause our own extinction, which is unlikely, but not impossible with nuclear weapons. I think, it's just what we do as a species. We expand out and we explore new places, and that's the next logical step. So let's do it. Okay, good. But if it was just for saving our species, we'd be far better putting the money into research on game theory, for example.
What?
And how political leaders can solve conflicts, or how.
What the fuck? No. We're going to save the planet. We shouldn't just give a bunch of money to a bunch of nerds studying game theory. Like, whatever. Game theory is a perfectly reasonable thing to study, and it can give you insights into human behavior. But what the fuck? We're just going to fix politics with game theory, and then what? Plant some trees, touch some grass? What the fuck is this guy talking about?
Can solve conflicts, and what's the best structure for governance of a collection of people to...
It's the structure of governance those people will tolerate without overthrowing the government, you dumb fuck. You don't get to just decide from on high as a game theorist what structure a government should have. That's called dictatorship.
Reduce or attenuate the possibility of massive conflict that could then escalate to using nuclear weapons, because we can't unlearn nuclear physics. And somebody on Mars 5,000 years from now could reinvent nuclear weapons because the knowledge is there. So it's better to, I think, to put it in the human realm of how do we prevent people from having those sorts of conflicts that could ever escalate to nuclear conflict. And there we've actually made a lot of progress. We understand why leaders do what they do, and but maybe there's a completely different, say, I don't know if you call it a theory of everything in politics, but let's say I wrote this essay called Governing Mars. So, all right, what kind of governance should we take with us? Well, we've learned a lot here on Earth.
If we go to Mars, unfortunately, it probably has to be a fucking dictatorship.
Blue planet. So maybe we should take the best of what we have to the red planet. But maybe Elon's engineers or his...
I mean, if we took Michael Shermer's favorite 10 people in the world and shot them off to Mars, would that be a bad thing if Michael Shermer got to choose who the 10 fucking people were or whatever, or who the best people were, and we got rid of them on this planet? I feel like this is a win-win, actually. I agree with Michael Shermer completely here now. We send who he thinks are the best people to another planet.
Or whoever, or the Martians themselves centuries from now will come up with some completely different way of structuring the economy and political systems that we can't even think of. That's way better than democracy. Democracy is great, but it's not perfect. So maybe there's something that none of us can think of. And there I would like to say we should have funding for that. Just like, okay, you think of something completely new that no one's ever thought of. Okay, second part to your question, I think, is an epistemological one. How do you know if somebody's theory of everything has any hope for succeeding here? I have a lot of experience in this because most of these theories of everything I get are in the physical sciences, and I always.
But that's not experience. Wait, people email me their crackpot theory of everything, so I have a lot of experience. What the fuck? Come on, dude, that's not experience. Just crackpots are emailing you.
Asking me, I'm a social scientist historian, so I don't know anything about physics. Why don't you take it to Kip Thorne at Caltech and ask him, or Michio Kaku, or Brian, or whatever.
I noticed. Oh, come on, you could have mentioned Sabina and just left Eric out. Come on, you like. I don't like Michael Shermer, but he has to know that Eric's theory of everything is a bunch of bullshit, right? He has to know.
Accept it because they're flatlanders, and scientists are dogmatic and closed-minded, and they can never accept new ideas. Well, if that was true, there'd be no progress in science. So obviously it's not true. So there's a reason for why science.
Oh, Eric didn't like that.
Theories of everything, or any kind of sort of fringe or new idea that's challenging.
Catherine, bring Brian back in. Brian's cool. Brian talks about something you can tell he knows about, and he talks about it in a way that I can understand. Bring Brian back in.
The mainstream, and that is because most new ideas are wrong, including those by brilliant scientists. Scientists are often just spitballing ideas, just trying to come up with stuff that they can test and just see how and float it out there to see how it goes. And most of the time, it doesn't go anywhere. I'll tell you a funny story. Stephen Wolfram, who was the youngest PhD ever at Caltech, a super brilliant guy, Mathematica, and so on. He wrote this book called A New Kind of Science. And so to my utter surprise, his office called me and said, well, he'd like to meet with you. I was like, me? Okay. So, and what he wanted to know is, as a historian of science, how do scientific revolutions come about? Because I kind of like to bring out my own scientific revolution with my new kind of science. It's like, it doesn't come from the top down. You can't just like orchestrate it. Your ideas either lead to some new fruitful research and other ideas by graduate students and other professors, whatever, or it doesn't. And usually it doesn't go anywhere. And he's like, oh, okay. And, sort of following his work, again, brilliant guy, wonderful ideas and so on. I don't think it's changed the science. It either does or it doesn't. So there, the best you could do is just kind of put it out there to your colleagues and hope that it changes the way they think. And
but Eric's colleagues are like Sam Harris and Brett Weinstein and you, Michael Shermer. Eric's colleagues are like the IDW, like Joe Rogan and Dave Rubin and shit. And those people aren't qualified to assess Eric's unqualified crackpot theory of everything. So Eric thinks like the two people in the center of this are his colleagues, but the only one of these people on here that's his colleague is Michael Shermer, because they're both like culture war lunatics, like trying to couch their beliefs about the culture war in sciencey sounding language. And Eric just puts on top of that like a completely delusional idea that he unified physics by himself in his spare time, and he uses a fucking toilet paper roll to explain it.
Doesn't? Well, that's just the way it goes. It's probably not a fruitful idea.
Now, Eric, I'm going to bring you in here because you aren't coming from mainstream academia. You do, of course, have a PhD in mathematical physics.
He is not coming from mainstream academia. The two people in the middle are coming from mainstream academia. Catherine. He is coming from mainstream Teal Capital, which I always do this. I forgot to do this at the beginning. Teal Capital is not the big venture firm that Peter Thiel is involved with. That's called the Founders Fund. Teal Capital is a boutique capital firm that more or less invests in Peter Thiel's personal interest. I think it's the best way to explain it. Whereas Founders Fund has a lot of other people involved and they're investing more to make money, I guess.
But your theory of everything hasn't gone through the peer review process that in normal academic circles. So what's your...
You're from mainstream academia, but you made a theory of everything and then didn't submit it for peer review. Shut the fuck up. He's not from mainstream academia.
Your thought on this, is science being slowed down by the academic pressures? Do we need to pay more attention to...
Eric? Yes, that's what he's going to say.
To non-mainstream ideas?
Well, most non-mainstream ideas are lousy. And no, they are. And most mainstream, I mean, look, the community that I've been most angry with, the string theory community,
But you're a venture capitalist. I bet string theorists aren't big fans of venture capital either, dude.
Not because string theory is a bad idea. There's nothing that the equations aren't going to hurt you and the ideas aren't going to hurt you. It's just the 80s version of string theory was murderous. The whole point was we've got this. There are only 5 theories. We'll go through them and then we'll tell you the answer. And everybody else is just a poser. And
is that what string theory was saying in the 80s, or were people just calling you a poser in the 80s? I feel like a lot of this stuff, and it's not just Eric. Sam Harris does it too, and Eric's brother Brett does it. They'll take their personal experience with maybe even just 1 or 2 people in a particular field of study, and they'll just fucking universalize that and say, well, that's how the people in this fucking thing act. Where in reality, there were probably people working on string theory in the 80s or 90s or whatever, and Eric fucking was, having a nice scotch with them or whatever, and trying to tell them that their whole fucking thing was bullshit or something. And they were like, well, you're not really working in the field. So fuck you. And he fucking probably blew that shit up, that the whole world, that the whole fucking endeavor of string theory is like that. And by like that, I mean, doesn't think he's the smartest person in the room.
It poisoned the entire culture. Now, that poisoning didn't happen uniquely within physics. Unless you cross fields and unless you've released the theory of everything, you have no idea of the current state of academics. I just called, for example, Peter Voigt, who runs the blog Not Even Wrong and is a colleague of Brian's at Columbia. And, of course, I'd read his new foray into the world of theories of everything, as I read Stephen Wolfram's and Garrett Lisi's and every one of these. And in general, everyone who releases one has the same reaction, which is, even if you come from a position where you have a PhD and you come from the mainstream, the issue of reputational dynamics is such that everyone is looking for a kill shot. How do I make Peter Voigt go away so I never have to listen to him again? How do I protect my precious reputation so that...
From what? What the fuck is he talking about? He called this... Okay, here's what I think happened. I think some dude he's talking about, he's a colleague of the Brian, the really cool guy on this panel. The dude wrote a thing about the theory of everything, saying that it's like reputational suicide because almost, the things are crackpot ideas, and like, when they get subject to peer review isn't good. Or maybe even brought up Eric, who just did that shit and pretended he had the fucking crack the code and nobody was listening to him, and explained it with a pin and a fucking toilet paper roll. And then Eric got the guy on the horn and probably fucking berated him. I think that's what happened.
Effectively, I can dismiss my colleagues and continue to stay in the game, because the main product here is that we have a certain amount of prestige. Now, I've made the decision that you cannot actually pursue this within the academic community. Stephen.
You fucking did that presentation on the chalkboard and everybody laughed at you. And then your brother fucking claimed to have like fucking revolutionized goddamn biology. And people were like, well, this isn't really true. And then someone like had a similar like thing that was like better founded, and they got an award for it. And then fucking Brett said that, or Eric said that they stole the fucking award from Brett. And I think he thinks his wife also like did some kind of fundamental work that would revolutionize economics and wasn't taken seriously. And the odds that these three people, two of them brothers and one of the brothers' wives, would have done these three things, that it's so far-fetched that the odds are basically zero. So this is all about personal fucking aggrievement for this guy.
And Wolfram has bounced out, having a company to support his research. Garrett Lisi has made shrewd investments. Julian Barbour translates things. The problem is that we've had a catastrophe in the culture of academics due to the fact that it had a period of rapid expansion. And when that came to an end, it became sort of a Ponzi scheme meets the Hunger Games. So what you find out when you release one of these things is that nobody is really taking these theories seriously.
Sabina, why are people...
Oh, this is great. She's going to ask Sabina why people aren't taking this seriously. I hope she just goes after Eric here. Just go after Eric.
Is that nobody is really taking these theories seriously.
Sabina, why are people not taking this stuff seriously?
Well, because, I mean, so it depends on exactly what you're talking about. I think the different theories of everything have different problems. Like, I mean, for example, like your random engineer who writes to me, I don't take this seriously because those are normally people who don't understand the problem they're trying to solve in the first place. They don't reach the scientific standard. Or in many cases, what's actually happening is that they are reinventing an idea that physicists have discarded long ago because they understood that it doesn't work. So that this happens more often than you may think.
Yeah, she just said it's a bunch of crap. That's my translation here. This is a bunch of crap.
So, if I may add a little historical perspective, I think what's happened in the foundations of physics is that we had all those successes coming from unification, which Michael and Brian were already alluding to earlier. So we unified the electric and the magnetic force to the electromagnetic, and then we had the electroweak unification, and now we have the standard model and gravity. And we've had this since the 1970s. And at that moment in time, the reasonable thing to do was to go for an even bigger unification, right? Because that had worked before. And that's exactly what physicists did. They developed string theory for a different purpose, but then they figured out, okay, it contains something that looks like gravity. Maybe that'll do the trick. And then there were also those ideas of grand unified theories that made some predictions that people looked for in the 98.
We have a grand unified potato theory. I'll briefly talk about it like at the on the outro part of this show, if I remember.
For example, that protons should decay, but protons were not seen to decay, and those theories were ruled out. And string theory, well, we know how this went, right? It never made any concrete predictions. And then was kind of supersymmetry was kind of outsourced, and that made some predictions run into conflict with experiments, and then it was amended, and then now it's run into conflict with experiment again, and now people are fudging it again. And I think the problem we have in academia there is that people tried something and it didn't work, and they didn't get the message, and now they're just trying the same thing over and over and over again, and it still doesn't work. So I agree that we need some new ideas, some new inspiration, just to that people stop doing the same thing over and over again and inventing some new particles which are then never found. It's just not going anywhere.
Okay, Eric, very briefly.
This is a primary confusion. We have ideas and we have instantiations. Let's just take what Sabina said about grand unified theories. The original SU5 grand unified theory predicted proton decay at a particular scale. We didn't see it when we filled up a mine with fluid to look for this. It doesn't rule out the Petit Salam theory. It doesn't rule out different versions of it. And in the case of supersymmetry.
But what the fuck? Yo, she just said, hey, we did an experiment and this thing didn't work. And you got a problem with that now? Come on, man. I don't even know what these other theories are talking about. But if it's a different theory, well, then yeah, the experiment that showed that one theory doesn't work, or that one like hypothesis or whatever doesn't work in practice, it doesn't rule out other stuff. It may happen to rule out other stuff, but that wasn't why they were doing it.
Is an abstract idea. What we've invalidated is various.
She wasn't talking about Eric, but he couldn't imagine that thing that she was saying wasn't really about him, right? Because we've watched enough Eric Weinstein to know that it's all about Eric Weinstein.
Instantiations of an abstract idea, and we've pushed it into a realm of unnaturality. Now, Sabine is quite correct that most of these people become very attached to whatever they've said because it fixes to their ego. We all are.
Eric, yes, that most of these people. Yes, Eric, you're now describing yourself.
But the idea that's really important is what happens if, for example, the affine space you're supposed to be trying this on is not Minkowski space, but the space of connections. That would be a different instantiation. What if the right group to be looking at is a different version? Dirac, in his 1963 Scientific American article, pointed out that Schrödinger, his initial formulation and instantiation was wrong, but the theory was right. The key problem is that we have to give up on bad instantiations and continue to push the ideas that have yet to find their correct instantiation.
Thank you, Eric. Brian, is it possible to imagine a future where academics will agree on a theory of everything? And I think you already started off saying there is no such thing as a theory of everything, but please give us your concluding thoughts, Brian.
Well, bringing us back from theory of everything to the kind of theory that we've really been focusing upon in this conversation, some sort of unified description of the fundamental laws, the fundamental particles, putting gravity into the story, putting quantum mechanics into the story. I do think that it's quite possible, and indeed likely, that there will come a point where we do have the theory that the majority of the academic community will agree upon. Now, some would suggest that we're further along that road than perhaps some of the other discussants today would agree on. Is string theory that theory? I don't know. Nobody does. But I will say that this general view that string theory is stagnant, or somehow its main role is to keep string theorists employed and to keep other voices and other ideas out of the discussion, certainly doesn't resonate or align with my experience over the past 30 years. My experience is that physicists are generally interested in heading toward the truth and are open to ideas that really feel like they're doing that. And so if someone comes along tomorrow with a mathematical proof that string theory that we thought was internally consistent mathematically, if there's a real flaw that kills string theory mathematically, the community will not try to continue to support it if it's a convincing argument. The community will move on because most of us, or perhaps I should speak for myself, think you go around once, you live once, and our goal is to contribute to this inexorable drive toward a deeper understanding of the world. And if string theory is not that theory, I would love to know that today. If there's a proof that shows that the mathematics doesn't work, and I'd be willing to drop it completely and move on. Now, that hasn't happened. I suspect it won't happen. But indeed, the general psychological orientation of most of us is, let us try to press forward to a deeper understanding of the world. That's what matters.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you so much to my four speakers this evening, who were just simply fantastic. There wasn't enough time, really, was there, to debate, but we will carry on. Thank you, everyone.
But you're it's just a YouTube channel. You could have whatever. Anyway, so I said that before we get out of the podcast part, I'd explain my grand unified theory of potato. And it has nothing to do with physics, but it's kind of funny. Like, it used to be that, like, the IDW was sort of discrete from the conspiracy community, and that different kinds of conspiracism were kind of, to some extent, discrete from each other. And then that was maybe not that those people weren't necessarily left or right politically, but that it didn't line up with politics. Well, we think basically the QAnon phenomena ushered in a grand unified theory of potato, where now all that shit's just one big dumb fucking potato. I don't have any mathematical proofs of it, and I'm not going to submit it to a journal because I would probably get my fucking clock cleaned. But I'm not going to blame the people in the journals for being stupid. Probably going to blame myself for not really having, sussed out grand unified potato theory in my head very well. Usually I've really thinking about it honestly late at night when I've been drinking. The Now Space probably knows what I'm talking about. But on the on the subject of this, one thing that I did learn was that Brian Greene is cool as fuck and has done acid. And the other thing is that the two quantum physicists didn't really agree with Eric, and they're not going to be mean or whatever. They're not like me, but they clearly didn't agree with Eric. And at the end, the guy was like, "Hey, what you're saying about string theory is dumb. We're not just going to keep going on string theory because that's like what we've been doing before." And so I guess that's it. It's always interesting to listen to Eric talk to scientists because they don't take him so seriously. But they're never rude, which is great because he'll continue to talk to scientists and they'll take apart his theory of everything without being super rude like I would. I mean, I'd just ask him, like, why would you think that you by yourself have unified physics and that the entire scientific community is out to get you? Like, I would just focus on that kind of delusional belief set that you're right, everybody else is wrong, and that they're trying to suppress your ideas. But it's not the job of a scientist or a science communicator to do that. The job of the science communicator is to communicate the current state of science. The job of a scientist is to do their fucking job in the lab or at a university or in some other role in the private sector. Eric's job is venture capitalist and talk show host. And that's been the Intellectual Dollar Tree this week, podcast listeners. Live viewers, live listeners, wherever you're listening, stick around. We're not going anywhere. Podcast people, if you want the audio capture of the post game, you can go out and go on patreon.com/Echoplex and subscribe to the $5 level. That's not the main way people support around here. So you don't have to do that. If you just email me, echo@echoplexmedia.com. I'm not literally paywalling a fucking MP3 over you over $5. I'll send it to you because, I don't know, I'm a pal like that. Anyway, thanks for listening this week. HK will be back next week, and maybe we'll do something a little fun and off the beaten path next week. This is Boomers by Periscope, and I'll be right back. Lights will be red. I'll have a cocktail, and we'll try to find talk from Michio Kaku about the theory of everything, because I'm sure that'll be fucking bonkers. Intellectual Dollar Tree out.